have a presentation on spiritual art. Leading this talk is Jennifer McCormick. Jennifer is a mixed media artist based in North Carolina. She's a graduate of the Department of Art as Applied to Medicine at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and she's also a certified medical illustrator. Let's join me in welcoming Jennifer McCormick.
Good morning. It's nice to be here among all of these divine people, treated so kindly. And I see my friend from long ago in the audience. So let's get started. I'm going to talk to you about spiritual art, and one of the physicians yesterday suggested that spirituality might have a genetic component. And that is my grandfather, Albert Mariano, painting the patron saint Marzial, patron saint of immigrants, Italian immigrants. And I want to give special thanks to Sonia Doi, Bob, and Marianne Oberg for being here. We're going to take a look at what my soul has been thinking about since the beginning, well, since my training in medical illustration. And I'll show you how my thoughts and my spiritual development has been reflected in my artwork. Phase 1, learning to communicate about medicine. I was a graduate student at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, and this gave me the privilege of studying alongside medical students. The man who founded the department was Max Bradel. He's there in the white jacket. That's a picture from the turn of the century. He wasn't my teacher. But he founded the department, and he was my professor. The beautiful illustrations behind him. On what we should come to the program with. As I said, we worked alongside medical students, and part of the day we were in the lab, and part of the day we were in the studio. This is my professor, Renice Crosby. As she looked when I knew her, she used to terrify me. I'm just going to run through really quickly what the curriculum was. Biological illustration, that gives you an idea. These are different colored peppers, and we're learning about sagittal and axial sections. We're also learning about how to convey tone, yellow, green, red, all in tones of black and white. This one is attempting to communicate the overall look of the plant, what it looks like in cross-section, details about the leaves, how the seeds grow. Continuous tone illustration. Renice, maybe one of the reasons she scared me is because she had so mastery of all things in medical illustration, right down to how to take care of the very precise tools that we had. And there she's holding some black and white artwork, which we worked from Max Bradel's illustrations. First, we learned to copy those and create all kinds of spectral lights and capture texture perfectly. Illustrating anatomy, we worked alongside with the medical students to convey relationships, learn anatomy, and here are some of the corrections. I still have her corrections all over my work. That is a cadaver. And pen and ink illustration. When the program began, not every publication could have continuous tone illustration, and those illustrations, the different shades of gray had to be represented by a solid color line. The density of the tone can be changed by how closely you put those lines together and how thick and thin they are. but it's a very specialized technique, and here are some of the tools. Those are the diagrams about how to sharpen the tools. Specific. And we had operating room sketching. First rule is to stay out of the way of the surgeon. Second rule is to stay out of the operative field. And then we're looking for hand positions, and we're looking for, are there any special surgical instruments? Are there any special techniques? Then we are expected to put the story, to lay the story out in a very simple way so people can understand it quickly. This is the type of illustration, it's called a plate, and this is what would go into a surgical textbook. It is a reconstruction of the bladder and done in watercolor. Okay, so from after graduate school, I went to be the medical illustrator at the University of Miami for a few years. And after that, I went to the dark side and started doing medical demonstrative evidence for attorneys. So I learned another aspect of making art, and not just to teach, but to persuade. This creative activity has the ability to inspire people, touch them viscerally. And that's what I do with my medical illustration. And my company is called Art for Law and Medicine. This is how I begin the process. I take all the notes, the x-rays, photographs, depositions, doctor's drawings, everything and anything I can find on the patient, synthesize that information, and put these illustrations together. This illustration wouldn't tell you, this photograph wouldn't tell you what's really going on behind the scenes, and it's too graphic. This photograph wouldn't tell you that the man sustained some very life-changing and so that's where my job comes in. We show the mechanism of injury, we show a summary of all the injuries, and we explain it to the jury so that they can feel and understand. Sometimes it's simple like this. This one was a police brutality case. This one was a medical malpractice case. I'm going quickly through these so we can get to the spiritual artwork. But you can see these are different than the way that I would speak to an audience of physicians. These are intended for a jury. And they're physically quite large. They're about this big. So after doing this, watching this sort of parade of horrors for years and years, I know I'm helping people. I'm helping these injured people, but it wears on the soul. I want to know the narrative behind the patient's story, and I sort of went through a transformation because I run my own business, and it's many nights, it's late deadlines and last-minute calls and rush projects, and so I was working 50, 60 hours a week on the weekends, always concerned, no life-work balance. And so one night when I was in my office, one of the cleaning women came up to me and said, "You're wasting your youth." And I took that to heart. So I made some changes and I moved to North Carolina. And this is where my artwork began to change. The cost of living was lower, so I had a little more space in my life for making artwork. And I met this gal. You can see behind her, she has an alphabet that she's created on her own. It has her own meaning. Her name is Kelly Peterson. She was an artist and gallery owner, and her place was pretty spectacular. She had moss growing up the walls and all kinds of beautiful, irreverent things in the shop. And I just walked in with, I had done a series of illustrations called Warrior Women, and this is called The Play Date. And she said, "Oh, tell me what it's about." See, by the way, you don't walk into a gallery with a portfolio and under your arm. You just don't do it that way. But I did. I didn't know better. I was doing a different kind of art, so I thought this is the way it should be done. Anyway, she was really warm and accepting, and she said, "Let me see it." And I told her it's an outsider's perspective on motherhood, and she said, "That's really twisted." The show. So I put up my first show, and the Thursday before the show, she died. I had no idea she was ill. She was vibrant and fresh and alive and welcoming, and you could just feel her energy, and it didn't feel dark. And this is why I say neither a lofty degree of intelligence nor imagination, nor both together going to the making of a genius. Love, 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 that is the soul of a genius. Love gets us to the next place. I didn't say it. Wolfie said it. This is where it begins. At the time, I was working on a case that involved a mammogram, and I was so moved by her silent and sort of meditated with this x-ray in front of me. And this work began to pour out of me. The chest x-ray of a person who'd been involved in a motor vehicle accident. You could see the backboard with the holes in it behind him. It's a quickie from the ER. But the hummingbirds with their little hearts that beat 400 times a minute, they represent the organized chaos of the medical staff coming to the That's a sagittal section. Representing generation after generation of the material body. The place of worship represents the mind with all its mental and academic constructs. And the soul is represented by the vast energy of the cosmos. This one is called PTSD Possibility, and the dogs represent the darkness of depression, which is one of the symptoms of PTSD. But it's not to be menacing. Hope that it conveys the idea that although the dogs can be sneaky and walk into your garden, they don't necessarily have to tear it up. They don't have to destroy your space. They can be domesticated. And this is called Second Wind. Everything about it represents the forward momentum that we need during rehabilitation. This was my concept of otherness, of souls, of spirit. I'm just getting to learn about Spiritism, but this probably looks familiar to you. First light of consciousness. Cardioangiogram. When I do these pieces, I hold an intention in my mind. And if I deviate from that intention, I stop and I begin to work again when I recover that focus. might define flow as being on an invisible moving walkway where actions feel both fluid and somehow assisted. That's what flow feels like, and I know you've all felt it, whether you're cooking or dancing or playing an instrument. Flow is something we can all experience. Oops. No. Can we advance to the one with the shoes? Thank you. This is a piece called "The Patient Has Begun to Tango," and you'll see it in a second. You'll see the little toes and the shoes. But it was inspired by reading the doctor's narrative and his follow-up notes of a patient who was 83 years old and she suffered orthopedic trauma. But the two of them they clicked. And he always notices how her daughter is supportive and her mother, and how grateful the woman is, how positive she is, and she brings him a bow tie. So the title is really about noticing that this sort of goodness and spirituality does exist at some level. Even before I knew of this medical congress, I could see in certain cases that what you hope to convey is there, and you just need to pull it all together. You just need to get the information out to other people. Okay, so quite literally, you never know how your artwork is going to touch people. These are two police officers playing in my exhibit area, and and that's a mother explaining some artwork to her daughter, asking her, "What do you see here?" And when people come into my booth, we always end up having long conversations, and the other vendor's like, everybody just stays there with you all, and talks are you selling anything? The answer is yes, and the answer is yes, I love to talk to people too. Everybody sees something different in this work. mostly people will tell me about their own medical conditions if they can recognize the x-rays. These are some awards that I did for innovations in health, and these people were using a spiritual survey. So all of those folks were in rural North Carolina. And these are some medical students I had an opportunity to work with. It's their first week of orientation here, and they got to know each other by doing a creative project. I was working with them on assemblages, and other students chose to do some dance, other students chose to sing, do yoga. Point is, after a week, people got to know capacities, and it was really beautiful, and it was fun. We had fun along the way. Okay, that brings me to what happened next. The X-ray Vision series is what I used to apply to the Marianne Oberg Foundation for Spiritual Art. We were asked to submit artwork and a narrative on where we are spiritually, what are our thoughts on spirituality, and I did so. And on February 19th, Bob Oberg delivered the news that I was selected as their grant winner. By the way, you can pick up information about the Marianne Oberg Foundation for Spiritual Art at the registration tables. Bob created this foundation for his wife, Marianne, and I had the privilege of getting to know so much about her and about him and their lives together, and it felt like the natural place to begin the work. So I started with a similar process to what that I use for making medical demonstrative evidence. I asked for x-rays and for any written, anything written, which is, he writes these beautiful poems. I have a photograph and the story. Now, I didn't expect that the work I'd do would be a portrait of Marianne, but I wanted somehow to have her near me, to understand something about her, so that she could participate in the work that we do together. I immersed myself in books. This is a partial list of reading material. And I also did something pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? Careless. I turned the volume all the way up. I said, if this is the year that I have permission to explore spirituality even deeper, I want to go all the way. I want to go from mindfulness and flow and insight. I want to go past spiritual communication. I want to have an out-of-body experience. I want to have a transcendent experience. I didn't really understand what I was asking for. I knew I wanted that. Just keep that in your mind as I tell you what happens next. Okay. I'm afraid that this may seem, what did Dr. Alexandra Morena say? That this may seem like a negative religious coping. Go ahead and light your candles and burn your incense and ring your bells and call out to God, but watch, because God will come and he will put you on his anvil and fire up until he turns brass into gold. Now, my God is not that punitive, but the point is, if you ask for growth, you will find it. You're going to have to do the work, though, and the work is not necessarily easy. So we began. Let's begin with the spiritual artwork. I was immediately a section of Marianne's heart, and this is what I call half human, half divine. I was attracted to a CT through her eyes, and these to show an experience that Eben Alexander talked about in his near-death experience. He said he went from a point of consciousness to 360 degrees of perception. And I used those eyes to sort of show the expansion of consciousness. This piece is huge. It's about 6 feet long. And it's done in encaustic and pencil. Encaustic is wax. It's an ancient media. And as I mentioned, I also, Bob told me so much about his life with Marianne, and I don't know if I imagined it but I definitely felt it, that these poems that Bob writes would be so meaningful to Marianne that she would feel them and hear them, even incarnate. And this joy would be able to transfer to the others around her, like a semi-permeable membrane. So I don't know if there was any channeling going on, because that's not something I ever thought I could do about it. I'm hearing that word here today. But if you take a look, this is one of Marianne's pieces. This is her vase. And there's some strong similarities here in the forms that flow. This is a CT, a coronal CT, and the veils, all I can wonder is what's behind the veils. Is it another form of consciousness right next to us? What do they reveal? And in this one, I don't know if you're going to be able to see the detail, that's one of Marianne's octopus vases. See the little suction cups there? There's a very similar pattern. Don't know if you could see it. Very similar pattern in here. So as I'm doing this artwork, my intention from the beginning was to grow spiritually. And in May, my husband had an accident where he fractured his craniocervical junction, and that is his X-ray. But throughout the trauma, I remember the words of Bob Oberg and Marianne. I felt they were with us at the hospital. We are here for you, our friends. You are not alone. And so I would like to leave you with a poem. This lesson that I got was another lesson in impermanence. One of the hardest lessons we have to learn again and again in life. But there's something beautiful about it too, because love shows up. So this is Bob's poem, Affirmation. I affirm the morning, and I affirm the night. The falling leaf, no less than the seed, is a miracle. The knowledge that everything must end, no holding back. Let me die daily, so that the new may be born.